Alright, welcome back everyone, Frontier Geek. And this is Sunday, and it is February the 16th. We got back from New Jersey yesterday, and just doing a little walk around. I'm going to give you a quick tour of my truck. As y'all can see here, we got down in it. We got some mud, because if you got a truck and you're actually taking it off-road, then it's going to get dirty, and you're using it for what it's worth and what it's supposed to be used for. So here's some of the quick features here that I've added. We've got anodized colored lug nuts. We've got a 1.5 inch wheel spacer, if you can see inside there through the wheels. Those are mounted all the way around to increase the track width. Here we've got the fill ports for the Firestone Ride Right airbags. I'm going to see if I can get under truck view. See if you can actually see those. Well, they may not be the easiest to see, but if you catch it in there. And here was where I had mounted the GoPro yesterday. My very expensive 78-cent high-tech camera mount. We've got a trailer connector here, 7 pins, and a 4/5 pin. And if you note right here that there is dielectric grease inside to keep the contacts clean, that's important if you all are not familiar with that. That's a specialty grease which is used with electrical machinery to prevent corrosion. So here we come around the other side, which my brother was very astounded. Didn't actually really get all that dirty. Some of the other additions. Got a 16-inch LED light bar over here, along with a roof carrier rack from Kurt. Here you can see some of the wiring. I drilled holes through the housing for the third brake lamp and the cargo lamps to bring the cabling through, so that I didn't have to drill holes in the actual roof of the truck itself, which seemed like a pretty smart idea. Those are siliconed to keep the water out, and that runs all of the wiring. So if we come around here to the front, got a curved top light bar here going on, which is quite bright at night. I have another video of that, and I will be posting that as well, so look for that on the Frontier Geek channel. We come on down, you see the front wheels the same, and the 1.5 inch aluminum hub spacers. We come around to the front, we've got 2 by 16 inch LEDs as well. Come around, I'm going to open the hood. That is as soon as I find the hood release. These are always funny. There we are, and I've got hood struts that I've installed, which are very nice. And what was great about these was one of the Club Frontier members, who I am a member of as well, was very, very nice and donated these after he had bought a second pair, and said, whoever gets here first come first serve, I'm going to give them to you. All you need to do is pay shipping, which worked out really, really great. Here is my fuse and relay panel, which I constructed. These sides are made of pine wood, and the top is Lexan. And this is where all of the electricals come through. So I made sure that everything was quite safe and centralized for all of the electrical accessories. If you are thinking about adding machinery to your truck, this is definitely the best way to do it. Your factory wiring harness is only designed for what the factory expected for loads. When you start adding auxiliaries of any type, it's going to be trouble, if you're not sure exactly what you're doing, and that is very, very important. I'm going to be covering those in further videos, so don't be alarmed that this is very much a summary. I'm going to go through a lot of these projects step by step, and I'm going to be publishing a video on how to do wiring correctly, including end terminations, crimping and soldering, etc., because a lot of people are not familiar with that concept, and it can be a bit daunting if you do not have an electrical engineering or electrical design background, and that's fine. That's what we're here for. Moving over to the battery, you'll see that the terminals look a little funny. They're colored. The Frontiers are known for having trouble with their original batteries. As you can see, this one here is a little dirty, but it is a federated. The original battery has a hydrogen outgassing vent located right next to the positive battery terminal, which then causes hydrogen and acid to spew from that vent and end up on the battery terminal itself, which ends up causing massive corrosion issues. So you can see that I've cleaned mine up and I've sprayed them with a commercial battery terminal protectant, which you can buy at pretty much any automotive store. Moving around, and I'm going to apologize because this is a working vehicle. It's not clean or pretty, and it's certainly not set up for what you would see at the Philadelphia Auto Show. But coming up here to the top, you will see my overhead switch bank, which I constructed as well. And these are just commercial switches that I purchased along with the bezels. I will be supplying that information to anyone who's interested. These were about $8 a piece, if I remember correctly. And the funny thing is that switches that are very similar to this can be purchased anywhere up to about $16 each, which to me seems a little criminal that you're basically getting the same part and paying twice as much. So shopping around a little bit is quite important. This was a bit of a project as well. You can't see it, of course, but there is a ton of wiring behind here. Each one of these switches has 4 connectors, so there's quite a fat harness, which has now been hidden all the way up inside the truck's headliner. Alright, moving down from the top here with the switching, we come down to some other items that I've added, and as you can see, I have a bit of additional electronics going on here. The unit over on the far side is an Edge CS. That is a OBD2 compliant digital gauge package, which allows the computer to speak to the truck and provide readouts on what is happening with the truck's system status. Here you can see the system has completed booting and is now displaying the gauges. Again, this is an Edge CS. There is a CTS model as well, which is a full touch screen and has a slightly larger display. At the time, this was well fitted into my budget, and I decided to go with the one with the buttons, with the smaller display, the touch screen obviously being a little more pricey, which is pretty typical. This has now been through 3 different vehicles. It is auto sensing for the protocol that your particular vehicle is using. I had no trouble getting it to pair to my Nissan. It's also been paired to a Chevrolet Cruze and also a Mini Cooper. So it is compatible not only with multiple manufacturers, but also multiple countries as well, because obviously one of those is American, well actually American/Korean, one of them being British but engineered by Germany, and Nissans are actually built, at least the Frontiers are built here, if I remember correctly, in Smyrna, Tennessee. Moving on over to here, we have my gauge package, which I added. This is engine coolant temperature and transmission temperature. And I find these to be not only helpful, but what I would call really, I would say critical. Knowing what the true engine temperature is and the true transmission temperature is extremely important. The gauge here in the cluster is not really a gauge. It's actually more like what I call an idiot pointer. It only has 3 positions: cold, operational, and what I call you just blew your engine. It does not indicate actual fluctuations in engine temperature. When it reaches a certain point, the needle just jumps up and stays there. So this one here is a true engine temperature, which is connected to a sensor under the hood. The transmission temperature is connected to a sensor which is screwed in directly into the side of the transmission. Right near the transmission cooler lines, there is a test port, which was very conveniently and very nicely provided by Nissan themselves, which you can purchase commercial adapters to fit properly and screw a temperature sensor directly into there, which is what I went ahead and did. Then ran the wiring up from the chassis into the engine bay, through the firewall, and then up here into the gauges. As I had mentioned before, I'm going to provide more detailed videos on all of these different projects, so that if these are things that you would wish to copy, and I certainly would hope that you will, because I find all of these to be very useful, and sometimes, like I said, I consider critical. Transmission temperature being one that's very important while off-roading at very low speeds or towing a trailer. And unfortunately, Nissan did not seem to feel it fit to give us a transmission temperature gauge, although my understanding is that some models of the Titan have it. So that seems a little unusual to me, but it is what the engineers decided to do, and that's what we have. So we work with it. Coming down the stack, the radio and climate control are all still stock. Nothing's been changed there. This is a simple unit that I picked up off of Amazon. This is a 12 volt to 120 volt converter. This is what is called a pure sine wave. If you are unfamiliar with that, a pure sine wave is what your home or business outlets are delivering from the power plant. It means that it's cycling 60 times per second. We use 60 hertz, single phase for residential, 3-phase for commercial. In the United States, some countries overseas use 50. This is built for a 60 cycle, which is compatible with all parts in North America. The reason that the type of output is significant is that some devices do not like what is called a stepped sine wave. This one produces a pure sine wave, which is just like what's coming out of your outlet. A step, if you look at it on an oscilloscope, looks a lot more like a saw blade. This one is a nice smooth curve. As you can see, the graphic they have printed on the face of this shows you that it basically looks like a curve, and that is a sine wave. I believe for now that probably completes our tour. Coming on down, we got a little bit of bling just for fun. I installed carbon fiber pedals as well, which they're not really actual real carbon fiber. They're actually plastic with a metal backing. They were easy to install, just a couple of screws. They came with particular clamps that were mounted to the rear that are designed to fit around the pedal and retain them in place. I decided not to trust that, thinking that having a brake or accelerator jam would not be a very good situation. Understatement here, right? And so I went ahead and actually screwed these down with actual hardware to the pedals themselves so that they will not move. Other than that, the interior of the truck's basically all original Nissan. I'm sure that anyone who owns one recognizes all of this. Seats are pretty standard. Steering wheel controls is not changed, and everything else is basically stock. This vehicle is at stock ride height. It does not have a lift yet. That is in the plans. When the lift comes to pass, I will be producing a video of that as well for those of you who are interested in seeing how those particulars go and what a lift does and how to do it correctly. I've learned a lot in the last 2 years from the fellow people over at Club Frontier, who are very, very helpful in sharing their information. And so I will be basically doing the same thing and paying it forward, passing along a lot of that information that I have collected and learned, so that you too will not have to spend days, hours, weeks thinking about how to do a lift correctly and what the ramifications and possible downsides are depending on which parts you choose. That should be a good video. Like I said, that's going to be probably sometime later this year. I will let everyone know when that is posted and when that becomes available. The only other thing that I have done to the truck is an audio upgrade. Here you can see the tweeter mount. We come on down. The door, of course, looks completely stock because the new speaker is hiding behind the factory grill. These are Morrell's. It's a 6.5-inch component set, and they were actually made in the country of Israel, which I thought was very interesting because most people do not think of Israel or power force, a high audio or electronics, and yet these come from there and they sound very, very good. They are well engineered. The kit was not what I would consider to be particularly expensive, but it seems to be very well engineered. I've had no trouble with connectors or any issues with that, and the speakers themselves have a very smooth, pure sound and have not given me any trouble. Yes, this is not the cleanest of engine bays, but here we are, and as promised when I spoke about the engine coolant temperature earlier, this is an engine coolant temperature adapter. Early on, when vehicles were a lot simpler in the 50s, 60s, and even up into the 1970s, before fuel injection and all arrived, it was possible to take and just screw an adapter into one of the extra ports in the intake manifold, and that would then go ahead and send coolant temperature to your gauge of choice, which a lot of vehicles at that time either had no gauge at all or had a gauge which was suspect in its accuracy. So therefore, people would often add a Sun Pro or something of that nature, a Stewart Warner. Those were all popular back in the day, and they would go ahead and add those in. So this is actually an adapter which I purchased on eBay, and it was $10. The clamps that it came with were absolutely junk, but the adapter itself is beautifully machined. It's made out of solid aluminum, and I've had absolutely no trouble with it. It worked very well. You throw the clamps away, get yourself some Ideal stainless steel. That's actually the name of the company's Ideal. Stainless steel hose clamps, and you go ahead and cut a section out of your upper radiator hose, mount that in, and make sure that you do not forget your ground cable. If you notice here, there are actually 2 wires coming out of this sensor, and that is extremely important because without that ground lead, you will not get any signal at all. How the gauge is actually working is it's sending a small current through this wire, which then transmits through the sensor and then out through the ground wire back to the chassis of the truck. And as the temperature is varying, the sensor is changing its resistance, which changes the amount of current flow. Without that ground lead, you have no current flow at all. Therefore, your gauge will be completely non-functional. And if you do not understand why this issue is occurring, you'll probably be scratching your head because it will be very frustrating that this is not doing what you expected it to be doing and nothing is happening. Then you call your friend who understands electricity a little more than you do and says, hey, what's going on here? Quickly moving around to the other side, we're going to take a look. This is the front differential vent line, which if any of you are Club Frontier members, you've probably heard a lot about the rear axle vent mod being talked about. This is basically the same. This is the vent line that comes from the front differential to allow expansion and contraction of the air volume inside as the oil heats from being driven. The rear axle's vent line, unfortunately, is just a vent screwed directly to the axle itself, which is noted often to cause problems, being that the vent will stay closed and get stuck or dirty in that position and cause excessive pressure to build up inside the rear axle, which then blows out the rear axle seals at your wheels, which will not only require the replacement of the seals, but often has bad effects on the brakes as well, because your parking brake is located directly behind that seal. Therefore, it is quite important. So I placed a $7 K&N filter on here, which is designed for exactly these types of purposes. This is actually a PCV vent valve, which is usually used for engine venting, positive crankcase ventilation, PCV, but any gaseous usage is perfectly fine, and so this is a very cheap and very effective way of keeping any debris or insects from finding their way in to your vent. This concludes today's video. I hope you've learned something from this. I hope it's been somewhat edifying and hopefully slightly entertaining. As I mentioned, I'm going to be going through each one of these systems in much more detail in other videos. So if there are modifications that you've seen that I've made to my truck already that are of interest to you, please come back, tune into those videos, and I will give much more detail on how all of these things should be done, including a 101 level wiring and soldering intro, which I will do step by step while being videoed for those of you who have never done wiring before. It's really not rocket science, but if you don't understand it, it can be daunting, and a lot of people have done very poor wiring jobs and have caused either system failures or actually fires somewhere in their vehicle, often under hood. Obviously, this is not a desirable outcome, and therefore I feel that it is my responsibility, if I'm going to be producing video series, to go ahead and provide that information to you as well. So thank you for watching, and we're signing off for today.
Sorry, folks. We ran out of gas. Yeah, you know how it is with these